4:20 local time, the Gulf did not tremble. It detonated. 8 columns of afterburner flame ripped through the darkness east of the Strait of Hormuz, twin white exhaust plumes carving the night as 8 Iranian Su-35 Flanker E fighters dropped below 500 feet and drove west at combat speed. Their returns did not appear as random contacts or probing tracks. They appeared as intent. Inside the Combat Information Center, aboard USS Abraham Lincoln, the tactical display shifted from predictable shipping lanes to converging high-speed vectors in under 3 seconds. Multiple fast movers, bearing 087, low altitude, high rate of closure. No one shouted. The temperature in the room did not rise, it compressed. For 6 days, the carrier strike group had operated in international waters under routine tasking. Flight cycles, maritime security, visible presence. Tankers traced steady AIS arcs. Radar screens showed order. The night watch had settled into practiced cadence. At 4:18:42, that cadence broke. The Su-35s were not posturing. They advanced in a disciplined attack wedge, spacing exact, altitude tightly controlled. They rode the sea surface to exploit radar horizon geometry, shaving seconds off detection windows. This was not a spontaneous maneuver. It was engineered. Weeks earlier, U.S. analysts had noted expanded Iranian sensor sweeps along the coast. A mission collection had intensified. A Russian IL-20M had flown repeated training orbits in the northern Gulf, lingering long enough to catalog Aegis signatures and defensive timing patterns. The data had been harvested, the timing measured, and now, at 62 nautical miles, 8 fighters committed. At 4:19, surface plots bloomed along the Iranian shoreline. USS Carney's surface search radar painted fast-moving clusters bursting from hidden coves. 20 returns, then more. Small craft accelerating hard, dispersing into a swarm formation, speed climbing beyond 40 knots. At nearly the same moment, sonar operators aboard USS Porter registered a low-frequency anomaly beneath the thermal layer. Diesel-electric, slow, intentional, air, surface, subsurface. The scenario every naval commander rehearses but hopes never to see had formed in seconds. General quarters, all hands man your battle stations. Klaxons cut through steel passageways. Sailors transitioned from routine watch to combat posture without hesitation. On the flight deck, 2 FA-18E Super Hornets, already airborne on combat air patrol, received updated vectors before the alarm completed its second cycle. In the CIC, red symbology multiplied across the screen. At 55 nautical miles, the Su-35 formation split cleanly into 2 4-ship elements. Their radars remained silent. No search emissions, no targeting beams. But geometry revealed intent. They were closing for weapons release. At 4:20:11, coastal Iranian fire control radars pulsed to life. Brief, calculated bursts to support targeting solutions without sustained exposure. That activation was enough. Vampire, vampire, vampire. The air warfare commander's voice cut through the net. The 2 CAP Super Hornets pivoted nose on and engaged afterburners, accelerating through Mach 1 as their AN/APG 79 AESA radars transitioned from passive track to active engagement. Below them, deck crews were already locking additional FA-18S into catapults. Steam pressure surged through launch cylinders. On USS Carney and USS Spruance, Aegis combat systems shifted fully into war mode. AN/SPY-1D arrays locked onto the inbound fighters, computing intercept geometry in microseconds. Vertical launch system hatches unlocked in sequence, ready for immediate fire. But the Iranian timeline was already in motion. At 4:21, the Su-35s crossed 48 nautical miles. Lead aircraft pitched up slightly, just enough to meet launch parameters. 12 KH-31 supersonic anti-ship missiles dropped free in near-perfect synchronization. Rocket motors ignited instantly, and the weapons plunged back to sea-skimming altitude, accelerating beyond Mach 3. Seconds later, The trailing 4 aircraft repeated the maneuver. Another volley. The black surface of the Gulf erupted into streaking lines of white flame racing west. 24 supersonic sea skimmers. Time to impact. Under 2 minutes. In the CIC, the sky collapsed into mathematics. Vectors, intercept arcs, closure speeds compressing toward a single point. Missile launch confirmed. Multiple inbound. 90 seconds to impact. USS Porter responded first. 4 SM-6 interceptors blasted from her forward VLS cells in rapid succession, climbing hard before arcing down toward the oncoming KH-31s. USS Spruance followed with 6 SM-2s, overlapping engagement zones to create layered defense geometry. The night ignited again. Overhead, 2 F-35 Sea Lightnings II cleared catapults 3 and 4 in under 90 seconds from first alert. Their stealth profiles and sensor fusion systems immediately absorbed the expanding battle space. Fighters, missiles, small craft, subsurface contacts, into a single coherent targeting picture. But the Su-35s were not disengaging. They were advancing. At 4:22, as the first SM-6 interceptors converged on the inbound missile wave, the surviving Iranian fighters rolled into shallow dive profiles, tightening their geometry and pressing toward the carrier group, committed to the attack window they had calculated long before the first afterburner lit the sky. The remaining vessels accelerated, engines screaming at maximum output, their bows slamming against black water as crews pushed for the final closing distance. They needed proximity. They needed chaos. At 4:26:14, USS Carney's forward 5-inch gun fired again, the muzzle flash momentarily bleaching the night. The round landed directly inside a clustered trio of fast craft attempting a coordinated surge. The detonation lifted one hull entirely out of the water before tearing it apart mid-air. The second rolled violently, burning fuel spreading across the surface. The third veered off course, disabled, but more were still coming. At 7,000 yards, defensive fire shifted to terminal engagement mode. Mark 38 25mm chain guns rotated with mechanical precision, their high explosive incendiary rounds walking across the waterline of approaching boats. .50 caliber mounts hammered continuously, tracer lines carving luminous grids across the swarm. The sea became a firing range. At 4:26:42, a fast attack craft penetrated within 4,500 yards of USS Porter. Its crew fired unguided rockets in desperation. The projectiles splashed short, harmless against the destroyer's wake. It did not get a second attempt. A 5-inch shell struck directly beneath its bridge. The boat ceased to exist. By 4:27, 15 of the original 30 fast attack craft were destroyed or disabled. Burning wreckage dotted the Gulf in widening arcs. Survivors in the water clung to debris illuminated by fire. The remaining boats broke formation. Some attempted to retreat, others pressed forward, fragmented and uncoordinated. Above them, the air battle had tightened into close-range geometry. At 4:27:18, 2 Su-35s attempted a coordinated re-attack run, descending aggressively to reacquire launch parameters. Their intent was clear. One more missile volley, one more attempt to exploit the carrier's momentary disruption after the island strike. They did not account for the F-35s, the stealth fighters, operating from offset angles and feeding data to the broader network, had achieved firing solutions before the Iranian pilots realized they were targeted. Fox 3, 2 AIM-120DS separated almost simultaneously. The first Su-35 attempted a vertical break, dumping chaff in dense clouds. The missile cut through the deception, detonating just aft of the cockpit. The aircraft disintegrated mid-roll. The second Iranian fighter survived the initial blast radius, but suffered catastrophic tail damage. The pilot ejected at low altitude, parachute opening over hostile waters already controlled by American helicopters. 5 Su-35s remained. Fuel states were degrading. Missile inventory expended. At 4:28, USS Spruance's sonar operators reported renewed acoustic movement beneath the thermal layer. One of the suspected diesel-electric submarines had maneuvered during the surface chaos. Seconds later, a torpedo launch transient registered. The response was immediate. Spruance executed a hard turn while deploying countermeasure decoys. An embarked MH-60R Seahawk, already airborne in surface surveillance role, pivoted and dropped a Mark 54 lightweight torpedo directly over the contact datum. Underwater, the explosion was muted but decisive. At 4:29, the Iranian submarine surfaced abruptly, bow angled high, crew emerging with hands raised as U.S. helicopters circled overhead. The second submarine attempted to withdraw deeper. AP-8 Poseidon, vectored into the battle space minutes earlier, bracketed the escape path with additional torpedoes. Within 2 minutes, that submarine surfaced as well. The subsurface axis collapsed. At 4:30, only 3 Iranian fast attack craft remained within engagement range. All were damaged. All were attempting escape. They did not make it. USS Carney's final surface salvo ended the swarm entirely. By 4:31, the Gulf was a graveyard of shattered fiberglass and burning fuel. In the air, the remaining 5 Su-35s disengaged. Their formation fractured, turning east at maximum speed. Afterburners reigniting as they raced for Iranian airspace. The FA-18s pursued briefly, but were ordered to maintain protective perimeter rather than overextend beyond layered defense geometry. At 4:33, the sky cleared of hostile vectors. Smoke drifted from the Abraham Lincoln Island superstructure, but damage control teams had already contained the fires. Communications were rerouted through redundant systems. Radar arrays reinitialized on backup circuits. 4 sailors were confirmed killed, 17 wounded. The carrier remained operational. At 4:35, tactical summary updates flowed across secure channels. 2 Su-35s destroyed, both pilots captured after ejection. 27 fast attack craft destroyed. 2 submarines surfaced and secured. 1 anti-ship missile impact on the carrier superstructure. No propulsion loss, no flight deck compromise. Air wing intact. By 4:45, the engagement was over. The strike group maintained formation. F-35s and FA-18 remained airborne in expanded combat air patrol arcs, scanning for secondary waves that never came. The destroyer's Aegis arrays continued sweeping the horizon, searching for any renewed emission spike. None appeared. The Iranian assault had been coordinated, multidimensional, and calculated for shock. It had achieved contact. It had inflicted loss. But it had failed to overwhelm. The carrier strike group had absorbed saturation across air, surface, and subsurface domains, and remained combat capable. As dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon, the Persian Gulf looked unchanged from a distance. Tankers resumed steady transit. Wakes faded. Smoke thinned. But in regional command centers, recalculations were already underway. 8 advanced fighters, 30 attack craft, 2 submarines, 18 minutes of sustained combat, and the USS Abraham Lincoln was still moving. Surprise had ignited the night. Structure had decided the outcome. The 4th rocket's blast column rose against the carrier's hull, throwing spray and shrapnel across the waterline. Shock rippled through lower compartments, but structural integrity held. The hull plating absorbed the concussive force. No breach, no flooding. Inside the Lincoln, damage control teams confirmed what mattered most. Watertight integrity intact. Above them, the air battle tightened further. At 4:29:58, the remaining 5 Su-35s attempted one final coordinated maneuver. 2 climbed aggressively to regain altitude dominance. 3 stayed low, skimming beneath radar clutter, likely attempting to draw American fighters into split-altitude engagement. It was a last attempt to fracture the defensive grid. The F-35s did not chase blindly. They repositioned. Using off-board targeting data from the E-2D Hawkeye and shared sensor feeds from Aegis destroyers, they maintained a composite track of all 5 Iranian fighters without exposing continuous emissions. At 4:30:21, one of the high-cover Su-35s achieved a brief radar lock on an FA-18, escorting the damaged Super Hornet. He committed. Fox 3, an R-77, left the rail. The American pilot broke hard left, countermeasures erupting in silver clouds. The missile tracked through initial deception, but began to drift as electronic countermeasures degraded its seeker logic. At 4:30:38, it detonated wide. The F-35s answered immediately. Two AIM-120Ds launched from offset angles, converging on the same target from separated vectors. The Iranian pilot attempted a vertical spiral climb. The first missile missed, the second did not. At 4:30:57, the Su-35 disappeared in a flash of expanding debris. No ejection observed. 4 remained. Below the surface, USS Spruance's towed array picked up renewed transient noise. The second Kilo-class submarine had launched again. Second torpedo in the water. This one tracked deeper, likely programmed for carrier acoustic profile. The Lincoln adjusted heading by a controlled margin, not evasive panic. Calculated deflection. Carney and Porter deployed additional acoustic countermeasures. Nulka decoys fired again, splashing into the Gulf and broadcasting enhanced signatures. At 4:31:26, the torpedo corrected course toward a decoy cluster. Seconds later, a distant underwater explosion signaled another neutralized threat, but the submarine itself was still below. At 4:31:52, the P-8 Poseidon already overhead released a second Mark 54 into the search box. The torpedo hunted. At 4:32:19, sonar recorded hull cavitation. Emergency dive maneuver. At 4:32:41, the Gulf convulsed beneath the surface. The explosion was deeper this time, heavier. Minutes later, a damaged Kilo surfaced involuntarily, listing slightly. Crew members emerged onto the deck, under orders from circling helicopters. The subsurface axis had collapsed completely. On the surface, only 9 speedboats remained operational. They were inside 2.5 nautical miles. At that distance, small arms fire and secondary armaments joined the fight. Mark 38 chain guns tracked continuously, stitching precise arcs across hulls, attempting evasive zigzag patterns. One boat detonated internally, likely ammunition cook-off. Another flipped violently after a near-miss 5-inch airburst. At 4:33:14, 3 surviving craft broke formation and turned back toward Iranian waters. 6 pressed forward. They did not get closer than 1.8 nautical miles. Concentrated gunfire from 2 destroyers intersected their paths. Within 40 seconds, all 6 were destroyed or disabled. The Gulf surface was now scattered with wreckage and fire. In the air, the final 4 Su-35s recognized the shift. Fuel warnings were beginning to register. Missile inventories depleted. 2 aircraft damaged by fragmentation. They made a decision. At 4:33:49, the formation turned east. Afterburners reignited in twin plumes as they disengaged at maximum speed toward Iranian airspace. American fighters pursued briefly to maintain pressure, but were ordered not to cross pre-designated escalation boundaries. At 4:34:22, the last hostile radar track moved beyond engagement envelope. The sky cleared of red symbology. Inside the Lincoln, the island superstructure still burned in isolated compartments, but fire suppression teams had contained the primary blaze. Secondary communications arrays activated automatically through redundant pathways. The damaged Super Hornet successfully trapped aboard at 4:35, its pilot reporting partial hydraulic loss but stable recovery. Casualty reports were confirmed. 4 sailors killed in the missile strike, 17 wounded. 1 Super Hornet damaged but recoverable. 2 Su-35s destroyed with pilots ejected and recovered. Additional aircraft likely lost at sea. All 30 fast attack craft destroyed or abandoned. 2 submarines surfaced and secured. By 4:36, exactly 18 minutes after first contact, the engagement window had closed. The Abraham Lincoln continued making way. Reactor output steady. Flight deck intact. Combat air patrol maintained. Aegis arrays scanning. The assault had been coordinated. Air, surface, subsurface, and synchronized pressure. It had achieved a hit. It had inflicted loss, but it had failed to fracture the strike group's cohesion. In the aftermath, the Gulf slowly quieted. Smoke drifted low across the water. Helicopters hovered over debris fields. Rescue swimmers moved toward survivors, friend and foe alike. Inside the CIC, no one celebrated. They assessed. The Iranian squadron had attacked with preparation and saturation. The counterstrike had followed with structure and depth. And when the clock reached the 18th minute, one fact remained undeniable. The USS Abraham Lincoln was still operational, still armed, still moving. In modern naval warfare, surprise can open the door. Sustainment decides who closes it. No hull breach. But proximity mattered. The shockwave that rolled across the carrier's port side had been close enough to remind everyone inside steel compartments that distance in naval warfare is measured in seconds, not miles. At 4:30:12, the surface fight entered terminal phase. Mark 38 chain guns, .50 caliber mounts, and 5-inch naval artillery created an overlapping lattice of fire across the black water. Fiberglass holes ruptured under fragmentation bursts. Engines detonated. Ammunition cooked off in violent secondary flashes. Within 90 seconds, 11 additional fast attack craft were destroyed or disabled. The remaining boats did not maintain formation. They turned, not in discipline, in retreat. Above them, the remaining 5 Su-35s were bleeding initiative. Fuel state warnings pulsed inside their cockpits. Missile inventories were nearly exhausted. Defensive maneuvering had burned precious reserves. At 4:30:49, one F-35C achieved clean lock from an offset vector. Fox 3. An AIM-120D left the rail. The Iranian pilot attempted a high G brake. The missile detonated just beneath the fuselage. A 5th Su-35 disintegrated against the night sky. 4 remained, but their geometry was broken. The carrier strike group had absorbed the coordinated assault. Now it controlled tempo. Inside the Abraham Lincoln's island structure, damage control teams suppressed secondary fires and isolated damaged radar panels. Primary arrays were degraded, but not disabled. Redundant systems assumed loads seamlessly. Combat operations never stopped. At 4:31:15, a new order transmitted through encrypted fleet channels. Authorized counterstrike package. The defensive phase was ending. Retaliation was beginning. The Iranian squadron that had entered the battle space in precision formation now faced a carrier group that had not fractured, only recalculated. 04:31:42 local time. The order propagated across strike group circuits in under 2 seconds. Inside Combat Direction Center, the transition was procedural. Execute Strike Alpha. There was no theatrical shift in tone, just execution. At 4:32, 2 F-35 Sea Lightnings II detached from defensive orbit and accelerated eastward at altitude. Their sensor fusion systems began isolating coastal radar emissions, feeding the Iranian air picture. 4F/A. 18E Super Hornets followed, retasked midair from air defense to strike configuration. This was not improvisation. It was pre-briefed contingency. The objective was not spectacle. It was degradation. At 4:33:08, Iranian coastal radar systems intensified emissions, attempting to reconstruct a coherent tracking solution. S-300PMU-2 arrays and Bavar 373 batteries re-entered full scan. They anticipated withdrawal. They received approach. The F-35Cs operated ahead of the strike line, minimizing exposure while refining emitter coordinates. Data from the E-2D Hawkeye fused with Aegis tracking aboard USS Porter and USS Carney into a unified battlespace map. At 4:34, Porter and Carney opened vertical launch cells again. This time, the missiles were not interceptors. 12B GM-109. Tomahawk cruise missiles surged into the sky, banking low across the Gulf before angling toward coastal installations. Targets were precise. 2 active radar nodes supporting the Su-35 vector. 1 integrated fire control relay. 1 Revolutionary Guard Naval Command facility coordinating fast attack craft. At 4:35:22, the first Tomahawk impacted near Bandar Ejask. The radar site collapsed in a controlled but decisive blast. 30 seconds later, a fire control hub feeding S-300 engagement data was destroyed. Iran's southern air picture began to fragment, not collapse. Fragment. At 4:36:11, an F-35C released 2 AGM-88G advanced anti-radiation guided missiles toward a Bavar 373 battery that had illuminated the incoming package. The Iranian crew attempted rapid shutdown. Both missiles adjusted to last known emissions and detonated over the radar vehicles. The battery ceased to function. Back over open water, the final 4 Su-35s faced narrowing options. Fuel reserves were critical. Air defense coverage behind them was thinning. American fighters maintained disciplined spacing, refusing to overextend. At 4:37:04, 2 Su-35s disengaged fully, turning east under maximum afterburner. The remaining pair attempted a long-range R-77 launch. IA-18G Growlers, now positioned at the edge of engagement, flooded the spectrum with electronic interference. Both missiles lost track and fell into the sea. At 4:38, an AIM-120D from a Super Hornet eliminated the 6th Su-35. The 7th dove to sea-skimming altitude and fled. The 8th had already been destroyed earlier in the exchange. The air battle was decided. Below the surface, the final subsurface threat remained unresolved. At 4:39, P-8A Poseidon aircraft extended sonobuoy patterns across a narrowing corridor of acoustic contact. Triangulation refined. A Mark 54 torpedo was released. At 4:40:33, the underwater detonation forced the 2nd Kilo-class submarine to surface. Hull integrity compromised. American helicopters circled immediately. Crew members emerged under watch, hands visible. The three-dimensional assault had collapsed across all domains. By 4:42, the Gulf was scattered with burning wreckage and drifting debris. Smoke rose from disabled coastal radar installations. Radar emissions along the Iranian southern arc flickered inconsistently. The Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group reformed defensive geometry. 4:43 local time. The counterstrike was not expanding, it was concluding. Strike Alpha assets withdrew along pre-planned corridors. F-35s climbed back toward standoff distance. Super Hornets maintained patrol arcs to deter any secondary wave. No American aircraft had been lost. 1 Super Hornet damaged, 4 sailors killed, 17 wounded, 8 Su-35s committed, 6 confirmed destroyed, 2 disengaged under fuel constraint, 30 fast attack craft launched, 23 destroyed outright, 7 fled, several damaged, 2 Kilo-class submarines neutralized. The engagement window had lasted just over 25 minutes from first contact to consolidated dominance. Inside the Lincoln's CIC, the final assessment appeared across digital displays. Carrier operational. Strike group intact. Enemy assault neutralized. Coastal support nodes degraded. There was no applause, only recalculation. The Iranian squadron had attempted saturation across air, surface, and subsurface domains. It had achieved a hit. It had inflicted loss, but it had failed to break cohesion. And when counterstrike followed, it did not seek spectacle. It sought structure. The Persian Gulf slowly darkened again as fires burned out across drifting wreckage. By 4:50, radar screens returned to controlled patterns. By 500, flight operations resumed in disciplined cycles. The USS Abraham Lincoln never stopped moving. In naval warfare, surprise opens a window. Sustainment decides who remains inside it. On that morning, sustainment belonged to the side that recalibrated faster than it fractured.